Hello and welcome to the Absolute Game of Nerds with your non-geek, non-nerd hosts, JP and Rohan. And with us today, we have a special guest, Doug Bratton. He is a comic book writer, but I think Rohan's going to give him a much better intro than I can do.
Yeah, today we have he's a comic book fan, but comic book writer. He works with Regie of Regie Collects on the Isolation podcast. It's our first actual comic creator we've had on this podcast. So excited. I'm sure we're gonna have a lot of questions for him. But Doug, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Right on, right on. Well, so we always kind of start with the same question. You're a comic book writer. So if you're a comic book writer, you obviously have a love for comic books, we're assuming. So take us back to the origin and how that all started.
Well, I would say my first introduction to comic books was I have an older brother, Dave, who started reading and collecting comics. And my first comic book that I purchased was actually New Teen Titans Annual #1. That George Perez painted cover just grabbed my attention. And my brother had been reading them for years, but that was really what got me into buying, reading, and ultimately collecting comic books. And that was probably when I was about 8 years old.
All right. Do you actually still have that comic? I always like to ask that question.
I do. I
nice.
Still have it. And probably after about a year of reading New Teen Titans and then getting into G.I. Joe and some other comics in the 80s, my brother and I and another friend started creating our own comic book called Justice Force, which was in no way, shape, or form a complete ripoff of the Justice League. But so I like to say I had my hands in creating comics at the age of 8 and 9, and then was really fortunate. I live in Rockaway, New Jersey, which happens to be the town over from the Joe Kubert School of comic and cartoon art. And my parents found out they had Saturday morning classes, and at the age of 10, because they knew I was interested in comics and comic writing and art, I took classes there that Joe Kubert himself taught many, many years ago.
At Circle, I actually just learned about the Joe Kubert School because a guest we had on 3 weeks ago now talked about it as well. So, but real quick, I want to go back. Who are the characters of the Justice Force?
Oh, man. I remember... I don't remember them all. I remember there's a lot of mans, like Acro Man and Eagle Man. I think there was a Flame that was basically the Human Torch. That's all that I'm remembering. The villain of issue #1 was Dr. Paranoid.
Dr. Paranoid, I like that.
Yeah.
All right.
Actually, what's funny is I had my buddy and I were both artists. We loved to draw. No one could write, but we had our own. It was called X Squad. So off X-Men, X-Force, it was called X Squad. We had one big guy that could beat everybody up. We had one guy with made of fire. Then I started making more and more guys that were geared towards Maverick and Deadpool in the drawings. Yep. You had to have that Jim Lee inspired X-Men 266 through, the Volume 2 run where he just drew some great soldiers. So I understand that utilizing those great names. So
I think that's how everybody starts. You see something that you love and you copy it and you mimic it, and then over many, many years and growth, you develop your own creative muscles, and then your work becomes more unique. But that copying, I think, is an important early stage of especially for younger people when we first start writing and drawing.
Yep. And you still have all that stuff? Do you still have pictures that you drew or any stories you wrote?
I think my brother has at least. I don't know if we have the original
art. If you want to send it our way, we'll keep that original art.
Yeah. My brother might have some of our original art. my grandfather, who is actually still with us, a 99-year-old World War II veteran, back in 1980, worked for a chemical company in Illinois, and they had what was back then a Xerox machine, very rare. So he would take them in and make us like 5 or 10 copies to sell. So my grandfather was our first publisher.
All right. Look at that. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, if you still have them, it's just cool to go back and look to what you started to write and how you evolved, like you said, you know, like if you look at old pictures and think, look what I used to draw as like Rob Liefeld drawing the from the no chest to the big chest.
Yeah. It's like, it's very similar to like, you know, like Bill Gates likes to buy like those original notebooks of like Leonardo da Vinci with all his like original kind of stuff. It's kind of similar here, Doug, you know.
Yep.
I'll take the Leonardo da Vinci comparison.
Yeah. So how old were you when you were going to that Joe Kubert school for classes?
I think I was 10 years old my first summer, and I went a few different summers over the years. And I don't remember all of my teachers, but I do remember Joe himself, who at the time I had no idea who he was. You know, Hall of Fame caliber talent, you know, and to me, he was just this like older guy who drew really, really fast. And he was a fantastic teacher. And I do remember Mike Chen was one of my Saturday teachers. I think when he was a student there or had just graduated. So those are two that I remember. And I still live locally, and the school is owned and run by Anthony Marquez, who is currently the artist on Batman: The Audio Adventures. And I've gotten to know Anthony quite well over the years. So I'm still very much connected with the Kubert School. I think it's an amazing resource, and the art team that we hired for Isolation are all Kubert School alum.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Question. Tell me, what were like some of the classes that you took there?
I think the first was just an introduction to comic book. I think I had a caricature class once, and definitely a storyboarding class, which was interesting. And then the funny thing is, or well, not funny, but when everything was in lockdown in 2020, I had written Isolation as a novel, and the Kubert School had an online, everything was online then, and they had an online pitch class that Dan DiDio taught. And I was kind of cooped up and took the class, and that helped me with refining my pitch that I ultimately used when I pitched Isolation to Regie. Awesome.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna get into that. But so take us from there. You were telling me before we started, then that took you into a career as a letterist for the newspaper you said, or remind me exactly the details there.
So for about 15 years or so, I was a newspaper and magazine cartoonist. So I drew, I wrote and drew gag panels that were in magazines. The two biggest magazines I was in were Nickelodeon and Mad Magazine, and my feature was syndicated to college newspapers and alternative news weeklies. So I did that for many years. Very, very different type of comic work, certainly than Isolation. But I was, as I got older, as I started out with comic books, I got more into humor comics as I got older, as well as independent comics. ElfQuest and Matt Wagner's Mage were two comics in my teens that really opened my eyes to what comics could be outside of superhero comics.
Got it. Yep. During this time, so you got into those indie comics, were you also collecting other comics, or like was that part of the journey?
Yeah, I actively bought, read, and collected comics probably until sometime in high school, and then stopped. I continued reading, but more graphic novels, and then a lot of humor comics. When I got into college, I really got into Calvin and Hobbes and Bloom County and Far Side, and that's what kind of started turning my attention in the direction of syndicated newspaper and humor comics.
Oh, I loved Calvin and Hobbes as a kid. Yeah,
amazing.
Cool. Yeah, very cool.
Great too.
Yeah.
So you said Mad Magazine, or are you credited in Mad Magazine for any? Like I used to collect those, and I probably still have them somewhere. And so if there's issues you say, or whoever's on the cover, let me know and I'll look for them and see.
Yeah, I was in a handful. I don't remember the issue numbers, but my first one, I know the cover well by memory. It was kind of a spoof off of I think the iPod ads that were out at the time. So it was like Alfred E. Newman, very much in like a Mac ad from the early to mid 2000s. So
okay. Right.
Someone out there knows the issue number, and it's on there's some online resource that lists all credited artists, and I'm in there. But I remember
you would want to get in frame or something. That'd be pretty, like.
I have a copy of it, and the cool thing is I'm a member of the National Cartoonist Society, which is a professional society of cartoonists. And when I first, several of the New York chapter members are longtime Mad artists, the usual gang of idiots. And one of our chapter members, who's a great guy, and he passed away about a year ago at the age of 102, was Al Jaffe. And when I got my first comic published in Mad, I brought him a copy, and he signed it for me.
Oh, nice.
Very cool. Yeah. So Doug, talk to me about when you were a cartoonist in these, Nickelodeon, Mad. Are you doing the entire creation process, or are you just drawing, or what does that look like?
For the newspaper comics in Mad, yes, I wrote them, I drew them, I would, scan them, letter them on the computer, add color or bit tones, bitmap, depending if it was a black and white or color publication. For Nickelodeon, I worked with another cartoonist as a partner, Bill Alger, and he did a lot of work in their house style. So I would gag write and do basic layouts, and we'd submit those, and then when they bought them, he would do the finished art.
Got it. So what is your creative process or something? Let's just go to one of these ones that you're doing everything. You're kind of doing the whole creation, the whole drawing. Like, are you just sitting there and it comes to you, or like, where does that inspiration come from?
That's a great question. I found, and I think this is true for most writers and probably all people in creative fields, you have to find the time of day where you're most productive. And for me, that was early in the morning. So I would always keep a notebook and jot down everything from just gag ideas to scenarios that I thought I could get into a gag. And then I had a very set time, usually from like 8 a.m. to noon, where I would write gags in my notebook. And for the newspaper, because that's 6 days a week, what I would do is write for about a week or so until I had a batch, a month's worth, usually, or 4 weeks. So so 24 comics, and then I would pencil, ink, scan, upload them for syndication later in the month. So I would try and I was pretty disciplined at it, because you had to be with the deadlines. I would try and get a 4-week batch done in about 3 weeks to buy myself some time.
What is your, like, is there like, if you do 4 weeks worth of stuff, are you writing like 12 weeks worth of material and only 4 weeks is what you're going to end up going with? Or is it everything you go is going, or how does that look? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I pretty much, yeah, absolutely. I would pretty much just pick and choose from my sketchbook. So I might, I might have like 40 gags, and some I either, thought they were weaker and I just let them go, or if I felt they weren't quite developed yet, I would pick out generally my best 24 from what I had done. And every once in a while, also I have all of my old, I have like 20 notebooks filled with gags. Every once in a while, I'll just flip back through and come across an idea that just I never use for whatever reason. I'm like, oh, that's good, or oh, that's terrible. I know why that stayed in the notebook.
Did you ever have then like a dry spell or anything like that? Like you hear about writers that go into dry spells and things like that.
I don't really think I did, and I think that's because I figured out very early on that I had a 4-hour window, and that was my creative window. And as long as I kind of was disciplined and kept that notebook and ideas, and I wrote at that time, it would work. And it's more productive than others. There might be some mornings. And I think once I had it, I wrote 16 gags. I think it was my most in one morning. But even in a rough morning, it was just not coming very naturally. I could still write 4 to 6 gags in the morning. And I really learned that morning was that time for me by trying in the afternoons or in the evenings. And I could just sit in front of a blank piece of paper for 5 or 6 hours and not come up with anything, or come up with one gag. And just actually notice, mornings is my time. It's not even worth trying to write it. It's not going to work.
Got it. That's, yeah. I mean, I always find that I always wonder, like in that situation, like, are you? Oh, we lose them.
We did.
That whole last part was broken up. I kind of got the gist, but was it broken up for you too? Or? All right.
And
so, all right, we're back. Sorry. So what I was asking is, I always just kind of wonder about this process. Are you like, you said you have those times. I'm always curious, like, are they like asleep at night and they wake up and they're like, I got one. She's like, write down, there's a notebook next to your bed. But it's kind of cool. You had a system and it just kind of worked. Your juices flowed from these hours and these hours, and you just kind of rocked with it. And that's great. Yeah.
But to that example, though, I would keep my notebook right by my bed, because every once in a while, you'd wake up at 1 or 2 a.m. with an idea, and if I didn't jot it down then, I was never going to remember it in the morning.
Yeah, so. Totally. It's kind of like when you have a dream, and then you'll wake up like, oh, I really want to remember that dream. And then like 5 minutes later, you're like, it's gone.
And that's the writer's nightmare, especially a cartoonist. Like, if you had an idea that you thought was hilarious and you, for whatever reason, didn't write it down, and an hour later you couldn't remember it, you'll obsess over that for weeks, because you're like, oh, I had a good one and it got away from me.
Yeah, I swear, I think the memory is better when you're a kid with your dreams than when you're an adult. I find that my dreams are not as encompassing as they once were, and I don't like Rohan, but I don't remember them either. So
the thing is, they could be all encompassing. JP, you just already forgot them. You don't even know.
I know.
Doug, going kind of back to your process, when you said you had, you kind of trimmed down to the best 24. Did you do that all on your own, or did you have someone that kind of like reviewed and be like, yeah, okay, I think these are the best, or anyone that helped in that process?
I would mainly do it myself, but my older brother is still a sounding board for me. So I might occasionally, one, I'd send them to, correct any of my typos because I'm not a good speller. But every once in a while, I would seek his feedback, like, hey, is this worded right? Is this funny? Does this make sense? And he's kind of been that sounding board for me with my writing since we were kids.
Got it. And then, so how many years did you do the cartoonist thing?
About 15 years actively.
And did that lead?
And
right
that
up?
was.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, that was actually preceded by about, I would say 5 years of aspiring to be a cartoonist and developing ideas and sending them to syndicates and, getting all those rejection letters. And, so there's, you kind of, you skip over the hard work that it takes and all the rejection it takes to get to the point where, newspapers and magazines are picking you up. But so 15 years of actively doing my pop culture shock therapy newspaper feature, after years of other, stuff that just didn't work.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like I don't remember all the exact details. JP, maybe you can remember, but like when you hear like the story of Todd McFarlane, he talks about how like he would just draw things and send them in to all the various places and just hope that someone would, give him a call or something like that. So yeah, I can't imagine, if you did that for years, like the drive it takes to stick with it. Did those so when you then got in and you said 15 years, essentially, did that lead right up to you creating Isolation?
There's kind of an overlap in a way, because for many of the years I was working on the comic panel and the magazine panels, I would have other ideas for other creative projects, but did not have the time to do them. So that's where that notebook would come in handy, and I would write down ideas. And Isolation first started as one of those ideas in that notebook. Years later, when I stopped doing the comic panel, I took a break for about a year just to decompress, and then went back to, what's another project that I couldn't do while I was doing my daily comic panel, that I'd like to work on now. And there were two projects in the book that I really liked. And the first one I did was actually wrote a script for a Batman graphic novel that I've never pitched to DC or published, obviously, because there's only one publisher on the planet that can do that. But it was good. It was good for me to kind of, make all the mistakes that I needed to on a project that probably wasn't going to see the light of day. And then I switched my focus to finishing up Isolation, which was quite a complicated and long development process, because it's a long form mystery series. And I wanted to make sure I really knew where everything was going, because I think the worst thing that can happen when you read a mystery is someone has a great premise or something that's really interesting, but they have no clue where it's going, and it just meanders. So, when I wrote a single issue script for Isolation, and then really shelved it because from working in the comics industry, I know how it's really hard to get a long series or an ongoing series greenlit. So I actually shifted and wrote a draft novel because I thought it'd be easier to get it traditionally published. And then just by circumstance and luck, my relationship with Regie developed, and he started a publishing company, and I was able to pitch Isolation to him.
Got it. So real quick, you were doing humor, and then you kind of moved to this mystery. What was the kind of thought process behind wanting to kind of switch genres?
I think after 15 years of writing a daily gag panel, it can just get a little repetitive, and I wanted to take a break and try something else. And also the newspaper industry at that time was just really imploding. So a pay rate dropped by I don't even know what percent, but say a newspaper was paying $10 or $15 a day for the panel, and it like almost overnight dropped to like $1. So the economics changed dramatically. That was certainly part of it. But I think at that time, after 15 years, I just wanted to write something different. And the two ideas that really hooked me that I kind of played around with over the years were Isolation and the Batman graphic novel. But Isolation just made a lot more sense to focus on, just because not near as limiting in form or publisher options as Batman.
Yeah. So a lot of people watching will probably not know the gist of Isolation. Are you able to give us kind of like a quick kind of like that sales pitch you gave to Regie? Like, what is the kind of overall, like what is the story like? What are we kind of looking at here?
Sure. So it's a mystery series about a researcher in the 1990s who discovers that a secretive community, Isolation, Louisiana, that had 3 years of extreme murders, and those years immediately followed 3 different wars in the United States: the U.S. Civil War, World War I, and World War II. And then Isolation just disappeared from existence, and it's about the overarching story is this researcher trying to uncover the mystery of what happened to Isolation, and each of the books really dives into those years of murder and what happened and why they happened and how it all connects to this overarching disappearance of this community. And there's horror and a little bit of fantasy elements in it as well.
Got it. Very interesting. Very interesting. So, forgive me if I, when I heard about Isolation, it was just via the comic book videos that I've watched from Regie that he's put out. I don't know if JP, if you had heard it from anywhere else, but I didn't realize, to be perfectly honest, I didn't realize Regie started a publishing company and then you came to him with Isolation. I was going to ask like how this all developed. So can you kind of walk us through? So Regie did start a publishing company. You heard of it, and then you went to him. Like, how does this all work?
So you cut out a little bit, but I think I got the gist of it. I met Regie, and I apologize if I'm off your question a little because you cut out a bit. I met Regie through watching his videos, and he had mentioned that he was looking for a writer to assist with his blog on his website. And, you know, I'd reached out to him because from watching his videos and getting back into comic collecting, I'd written some pieces just for myself that I thought would work really well as blog posts for him. And that's how we first connected. I submitted blogs to him. He, you know, he liked the gist of them. And we thought kind of similarly in certain ways about comic collecting. So I started regularly writing for his blog, and then writing for one of his ongoing series at the time as kind of like a script writer for one of his shows. And then through that, we developed a relationship and ended up writing together a book called The Guide to Smart Comic Collecting. And that Regie published that, and it was very successful. And I think that kind of really gave him the bug to want to grow, you know, his empire from more a video audience to a video and a print audience. And after that book, he wanted to move into original comic content, and had other writers pitch him ideas. And he reached out to me and said, hey, you know, because we'd worked together quite a bit at that point. He said, hey, before I greenlight another project, do you have anything that you would like to pitch? Which is, you know, was very fortunate for me because we had that working relationship. I had Isolation ready to go, a pitch developed, and you know, it went from there.
Wow.
Got it. That's very cool. So when he greenlights the project, you already have Isolation in novel form, we'll say. So then you have to then convert that essentially into comic book form, correct?
Yes. So when I pitched him, I did have issue 1 scripted, and every issue is an adapted chapter from that draft novel.
Got it. Okay. So how does it work then when you are writing a comic book? Do writers kind of always kind of write it like a book and then adapt it to a comic, or if you are writing a comic, you just start writing it? Like, how does that process work? I have no idea.
Yeah, I think that's actually very uncommon, and I wouldn't recommend it because it's twice the writing process. That's just kind of how I did it. Really, because I didn't think I'd ever get it published as a comic series. So, but I think a more typical process would be to create a basic, you know, structural outline, you know, design your characters, figure out where you want your story to go. And then once you have a strong outline, write almost as like almost like a movie script. Just get the dialogue down and the scenes. And then from there, that process of translating it into a comic book script is somewhat unique, because you really have to pay attention to, you know, how many pages this is, what's on, you know, the left side or the right side of the page, where you want each page to end in a way that's going to compel a reader to turn the page. So it's pretty complicated. And, you know, once you get the hang of it, it becomes second nature. But it's not as simple as just kind of like writing a page until you run out of room and going to the next one. There really is a lot of thought behind what's too much dialogue on this page. Where does the action need to end? What's going to compel that reader to go to the next page? Should this be a splash page? Should I keep it to 2 or 3 panels, or can I Can I have 4 to 6 panels? And the story will somewhat dictate that. But the script writing process, I view it as you're writing a script for an audience of one, which is your artist. You know, they have to have enough information to know what you need on the page, what dialogue needs to go on the page, what sound effects need to go on the page, but not so much that it stifles their visual creativity. You know, you want to give them some room to make some bold decisions of, you know, how big what panels are, what angles the action should take.
That was going to be my next question. I was very curious, like, as you're writing, like you were saying, you have to plan out kind of like where the page ends. I was curious, like, do you then like add notes, like this should be a 4-panel page, or this should be a double splash page, things like that?
You learned that from the school you went to, correct? You talked about
storyboarding.
I mean, that's
I think the Kubert School was certainly helpful. Reading other comic scripts. Fred Van Lente published and it's still on his blog. If you Google Fred Van Lente comic strip format, there is no one industry standard for formatting a comic script. So he actually published the one that he used for other writers to adapt. And I actually used his format and structure for that, which was really, really helpful. It is interesting. One of the things that I did learn is the spectrum of detail given to artists really runs the gamut. You know, Alan Moore was kind of known to, you know, sometimes write like an 8-page description of what he wanted on one page. Whereas, you know, the Marvel way, or, you know, the Stan Lee version was just kind of give a basic idea to the artists, let them pretty much draw the story, and then he'd go back in and fill in the dialogue. I'm kind of more like, I'm not on the extreme Alan Moore end of the spectrum, but I do believe very much in, you know, letting your artist know, hey, I think we need 3 panels, 4 panels on this page. Here's what needs to happen in each of those 4. But I will say, working with the artists, and we've had 2 lead artists on different issues of Isolation. One at times would approach me and say, hey, on this page, you have 4 panels. I think I could combine these 2 to make a 3-panel page to allow me more space to show the action. And pretty much every time she approached me with that, I agreed with her. On the flip side, my other artists like to add more in between panels. So sometimes I give him a script with 5 panels and he might add 1 because he wanted, for his way of storytelling, he wanted a little more intermediary action or to split up dialogue. So it really is a collaboration with your artist. And the creative back and forth in the storytelling, I think, works best when you have open communication with them and allow them to give you feedback on your script and occasionally make some changes.
Yeah. So one of the things I've always been amazed by is, like, when I think back to like the early 60s with Marvel, and he had Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and, you know, at the same given time, they were doing Fantastic Four, Avengers, X-Men, and, you know, these were monthly publications. Like, that amount of volume always, like, it really blows my mind that they were able to do all this all at the same time. So talk to me, how long does like one issue take to make?
Well, I would say a lot longer for us than it did for them.
Yeah.
You know, for me, the script writing isn't that long. And I think part of that is because I'm adapting it. The first, you know, if, knock on wood, if the series goes the distance, the first 12 issues, I'm adapting from the novel. book 2 and book 3 are outlined, not written, so that will be a different process. Our art team, generally, the level of detail that we include in the book takes longer, and most of them are, they're working artists, but at a point in their career where some of them have to split their time on other projects too. So it's taken us, I would say, on average, between 2 and 3 months to produce an issue of the comic. Whereas, and some of it too is as an indie comic and with a more detailed and complex mystery series, our page counts tend to be on average 28 pages versus a standard 20-page comic now. So that takes a little longer as well.
Yeah, got it. So the first kind of run is 12 issues then, you think, or is it beyond that?
Yeah, well, the intent of the series is to essentially do 3 books each that are between 10 and 12 chapters. So if it goes the distance, we expect it to be between 32 and 36 issues.
And then will that be a closed story, or is this intended, if it's successful, to just like keep it going?
It's really written as a contained story. So if we get to do the whole series and readers stick with it, you will know all of the answers to all of the questions that were asked in those 32 to 36 issues. With that said, the world building that takes place in the story would absolutely allow other stories to be told beyond that. If we were fortunate enough that our readership supported it through the end of 36 issues, there are certainly more stories to be told. But they would be different stories with a different focus.
So like when you're creating, let's just say issue 1, you're probably also marinating on other ideas for other stories for down the line, correct?
Yeah, it's there are certain things that I can only go so far in discussing as to not give things away. But there are absolutely very specific panels and story points in issue number 1 that I know connect to book 2, to book 3, and some that literally connect to the final issue of the series.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. It's a very cool, like that creative like I'm a big fan of George R.R. Martin, right? He wrote the TV show everyone knows, Game of Thrones, but he wrote A Song of Ice and Fire. And one of the things I have completely blown away by is, he's written 5 books of the main series, we'll say 5 books. And he's got, there's supposedly 2 more coming out. And, that 5 books is taken, book 5 came out in 2011 and the first book came out in the 90s. So we're talking 15 to 20 years of work. But in that very first book, once you read the series and then you can go back and read it again, you'll learn that there are allusions to what's happening in book 5 that happened in book 1. And I'm always just like blown away by the foresight to kind of plan out the vision. And it's just, it's incredible to me.
I'm a huge George R.R. Martin fan. And I will say, I think it's not often that comic writers are afforded that ability to plan something out like this that's that detailed and that long and then execute it. More often than not, you're pitching an idea to a publisher. they don't know if it's going to go, 2 issues or 102 issues. So oftentimes comic books can become more, episodic or soap opera-y. And I think that, it can do the medium a disservice, because if writers aren't given the time to fully develop ideas and create full story arcs and characters and develop characters and have a beginning, middle, and end planned out, that oftentimes shows. And it's why you'll sometimes read interesting premises and then a series will meander. I feel very fortunate that I had about 10 years to kind of plan out Isolation before I wrote it, and was lucky enough that it was picked up. So I feel like my situation was just probably 1 in a million, and I was very lucky to have that. But I will say, when you have writers who've clearly done that to a degree, even in the comics medium, like Neil Gaiman's Sandman, you can see that as the volumes go on, you can see those points of connection that were thought about very early on. And to me, that's my favorite kind of writing. When you read a Game of Thrones or you watch the show and you find out, who Jon Snow's parents are, when early on it was very clear that there was some, maybe you didn't know the whole story, and you're like, man, for someone to have thought about that 10 years ago and it to pay off years later, that's awesome. And I think that's, what I'm certainly, striving for, hopefully some of those moments down the road as Isolation progresses.
Yeah. And so, since we are talking about George R. R. Martin, I kind of question I have for you in terms of like, what kind of writer are you? So George R. R. Martin, for example, like, he talks about the different types of writer, and he describes himself as more of a gardener, in the sense that, like, he plants some seeds and then the garden grows, and he doesn't necessarily know how it's going to grow, but kind of as things develop, they go, would you kind of find yourself in that same vein, or is it a little different?
It's fun. We're both clearly writing nerds and George R. R. Martin nerds, because I think we've read those same interviews. And I find it fascinating because he describes the gardener and then he describes the architect.
Yes.
Which he is not. He's the gardener. I'm the architect. I have to, fully know a structure, plot out. I literally, in my notebook, will have columns that are like, what are the mysteries that are coming up in Isolation? And what is the resolution to those? When does that happen? I have to, I'm in my planning stage, I'm comfortable with having an idea that I find interesting. I'm not comfortable starting down a path writing and hoping I find the answer to that as I go. I'm that architect. Like, I need to fully build the structure out before I finish the building.
Yeah. I'm obviously not a writer, or I would not consider myself a creative type, but if I was, I think I'd be in that same brain. Like, I would be more of that architect type. I've got to build it. I couldn't just like let it go and be like, oh, it'll develop, it'll come together. Like, no, that's too stressful, I feel like.
Yeah. And I feel like, I mean, George R. R. Martin had some clear ideas in some ways of where he was going with the Game of Thrones. But, God bless him for having the ability to just leave himself room for a story to grow and meander and go in different areas. I think that takes a lot more guts than I would have.
Yeah. So let me ask you real quick, kind of going back a little bit, you had transitioned from humor to kind of this mystery, and you were saying, like, you had your fill of the humor and you kind of wanted to do something different. Has this filled that kind of that hunger?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been a lot of fun. And you probably couldn't go from two more opposite ends of the spectrum, writing a single gag panel, which is an entire story self-contained in one image, to let's write 1,000 pages of story that all connect. So it's exercising different writing muscles. I enjoy it. I think also it allows you to explore different emotions. My newspaper comic was satirical. So while it was humorous, I got to, I got to at least poke fun of, things in the world. Writing something like Isolation that has a lot more roots into themes and meaning underneath just the story is just really different, and it was something that I wanted to try and tackle as a little bit more of a mature writer.
Got it.
Whenever you said that earlier, that you moved from the comedic writing to the horror writing, I find that comedy can be dark. And so therefore those two can be connected. I don't see where you write romance, not you, but going from romance to horror might be a stretch. But comedy, I think, can go from one to the other. But the point you were making was one pays to 1,000. Yeah, much different in that regard. But I thought there is a connection with comedy and horror, definitely. So.
Well, and I have a very dark sense of humor, and I probably killed more people in my single panel humor comics than I'll kill in the entire series of Isolation. And at least one person gets killed in every single issue. So that's saying a lot. So I think your connection is right on point.
Yeah, I mean, that picture behind you is some of the art from Isolation, correct? That hand holding the axe?
Yep.
That is that
the if you cover? Can see it, that's the cover A original art from issue number 1 by Delia Gunderson, and those are 2 of the interior pages from issue number 1 also.
Very cool.
That variant cover, though, that kind of is reminiscent or a homage to some of the pre-code horror. Right?
It's
I forget which one it is, but that reminds me of that axe one. There's an axe one that you guys.
You're thinking of Crime Suspense 22, JP, with the axe and he's holding the decapitated head.
Yep.
Yeah, I think when Delia and I talked about it, what she was aiming for was kind of like an 80s horror movie poster vibe, like a Friday the 13th kind of, like,
totally.
If someday Isolation was made into a streaming series and they needed an image for the poster, like, what is that image going to be? And it was, it probably has its roots in Golden Age pre-code horror. Her influences were, 80s slasher.
I've seen that
posters.
That poster, now that you say that, I can't think of the movie, but there's a movie that has that same pose, and I don't know if it's Children of the Corn, Halloween, or Friday the 13th. One of them has that same look.
Friday the 13th has a kind of a silhouette of Jason holding an axe, and in it you see a picture. So that's probably the closest action to it.
No, that's cool then.
Yeah.
Nothing beats 80s horror with the grainy VHS that we watched,
Yeah.
Yep.
Can't really replicate that. I guess you can now with computers, but for a long time, that graininess just made it just more horrific and
I totally agree. Yeah, totally.
Yep.
So Doug, talk to me real quick. So I got connected to you because I reached out to Regie, to have him come on, and hopefully we're going to have that planned out, down the line. And he was like, I would love to, but I'm right in the middle of this is coming out right now. So I just need a little bit of time. in the meantime, talk to Doug. So where are we? It just came out, correct? Or can you kind of talk to us? What are we timeline? What are we looking at here for Isolation?
Yeah. So we've, the first 4 issues are out, and the next issue is in production. And Regie also just launched a second comic series called Marcus. Mm-hmm. So that was probably when you reached out to him, he was probably gearing up for the release of that at New York Comic Con.
Yep. Okay, that's what I was, because he was like, I'm going to New York Comic Con to release the comic book. Yep. And I thought that was, I said, okay, so that's Marcus. Got it. Where are people, where is Isolation sold at? Like, are people going to the comic book store to get it, or is it something you have to buy online? Or
there's probably the 2 best places are SwoldierPublishing.com. I know at least has issue number 1 and 2 still. 3 and 4 are sold out. Nice. But I think you can at least get issues number 1 and 2 there. I know there are a couple of there are several comic shops that carry Isolation. I know 2 of the bigger ones in the US, JAF Comics, JAF Comics. On jafcomics.com, you can, at least as of last week, you could still grab copies of issue 3 and 4. And then in Canada, there's a store, Capt Canuck Comics, that's almost like the Canadian distributor for Isolation. They get a pretty decent sized quantity. So if you live north of the border and you don't want to pay ridiculous shipping, the best thing you can do is order Isolation through Capt Canuck Comics.
Got it.
So I've seen them. I think I follow them on IG. Capt Canuck.
Yeah.
What are we looking at? We're all collectors here of comic books, and one of the things we think about with the books we collect is this has a high print run, this is a low print run. Like, what is the print run of Isolation? Like, what are we looking at here?
So the issue number 1 had by far the highest print run, in part because there were some store exclusives, and it was part of Comic Tom's mystery box. So there were like, at least 8 different versions of that cover. The print run for issue number 1 was 7,500. The subsequent issues vary, and I think Regie publishes them on his website, but issues 2 through 4, I think, range, somewhere a little above or a little below about 1,000 print run.
Oh, wow.
Got it.
So if you're, as a writer, I hope people get a copy and read it. That's what I like. As a collector, having a second copy of a comic with a low print run is never a bad idea.
Yeah, nope. Definitely.
So why did 3 and 4 sell out and 1 and 2 still are available on the website?
Is it because of the high print run?
Yeah, maybe that is.
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit. Were you asking about why 3 and 4 are sold out?
Yeah, why 3 and 4 versus 1 and 2?
I think just the size of the print run.
Okay.
I think that.
500.
Yeah, I know Regie. I think of the 7,500 print run, I think within the first month of publication, Regie had sold like between 6,000 and 6,500 copies. And issue number 2, I don't know the total print. I think it was a little higher. I think it might have been more in the 2,000 to 3,000 range. So I think for 3 and 4, he got better at taking the pre-order amounts and ordering to size. And the good thing as a publisher is that allows you not to have to store excess copies or have to worry about selling them down the road. The tricky thing about that is that they sell out relatively quickly and become harder to find. and then people have to get them on the secondary market.
Which isn't a bad thing, I don't think, because it creates the hype. It creates the rarity of it.
So we were just talking about how Regie was going to New York Comic-Con to do the release of Marcus. Have you been doing like a going around to the cons to promote Isolation, or have you done anything like that? Has anything going on like that?
Yeah. Isolation 1 was released 2 summers ago at San Diego Comic-Con. So Regie and I were there for that. And then I was at, I've been at both New York Comic-Cons the last 2 years. I think last year was issue 2. And then this year, 3 and 4 were already out. But Regie did con exclusive variant covers for Isolation. So I was there for signings at New York Comic-Con. We mainly hit the larger ones.
Got it. What does the timeline look like? I didn't realize it was that long of a span, to be honest. So let's just say theoretically, and hopefully we're going to do this whole full 12 issue first book. What is that timeline like from now? Now 4 is out. When is 12 coming out? Like theoretically, hypothetically?
It's hard to gauge because right now, it's so early that we're kind of in a, making sure each issue is profitable. So, number 5 has been greenlit and that's in production. That slows it up a bit. We are hoping the first 4 issues are kind of like the first story arc of 3 story arcs in the first book. We're hoping that if we can get a trade out, if that allows us to, the hope is that we can build up the readership enough so that Regie could kind of like greenlight multiple issues, which would speed up the process. Right now we're probably on like a 3 to 4 issues a year schedule. So if we maintain that, the first 12 issues, figure probably would take another 2 years to complete. If we can get to the point where we can speed up that process and we don't have to kind of like make sure we're selling out the print run and that it's doing well enough to justify the next issue, then hopefully I would love to see it where we're getting maybe on a bi-monthly schedule and getting out like 6 issues a year.
Got it. So then theoretically, if you were to go the full distance, do books 2, books 3, we got several years of work we're looking at here.
George R. Martin timeline here.
Yeah.
I'd ideally like it to not go. I'm hopeful that if it is successful enough to continue the distance, that at some point that allows us to speed up that process a bit and get to the point where we're doing 6, 8, 10 issues a year, so that to finish this series, it might be a few years rather than close to a decade.
Yeah.
With that said, I'm just thrilled that there's been the interest by the readers that have supported it enough for us to now be on issue 5. So I'm never going to take that for granted. To me, every issue that we're allowed to do is one closer to a complete vision.
Yep.
That's awesome.
So one question I have is though, sorry, for the writing that you're doing it, you got 5 episodes out, you've written the whole, or 5 issues out, you have the whole thing mapped out. If something were to happen and it had to end sooner than you wanted, could you turn and finish, or would it not have the same, it wouldn't be the same. It obviously wouldn't be the same story, but I'm just saying, if you wanted to have it completed just so it's done and there was some ending to the storyline for that run, could that be possible?
I'll give you a very honest answer. No. I mean, if let's say we got to issue 10 and it was like, hey, you know, we've got to wrap this up. You know, I could probably wrap up at least the first book, but it would not be fair to try and it would not be fair or possible to wrap up the entire series. With that said, I'm optimistic that we'll go the distance.
Oh, no.
But it's also one of the reasons that I've, written it in book form. And, I'm kind of pot committed to not leaving readers hanging no matter what. If keeping a positive view, I'm very hopeful that they'll get to read it all in comic book form. Excellent. If not, I'll make sure that the story is completed.
Now there's a comic book out there that somebody ended early, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. Maybe somebody knows, but the writer came back to finish the run because he didn't want to leave the readers that way. Now I just mean out of your and Reggie's control, something happens, a pandemic, whatever, and it has to, and you want to finish it just so that it's done. But it sounds like you're going to come back one way or the other and give the readers all of what you have laid out.
Yeah, it would. I think to try and hey, wrap up 36 issues of a mystery by issue 8 would not work. But saying, hey, okay, we finished a book in comic form, and for whatever reason there wasn't the market or the world wasn't seeing fit for it to continue in a comic form. Fortunately there are things like Substack and I wrote the entire first book as a novel. So if I needed to pivot and write book 2 or 3 as a novel, I could certainly do that too. Yes. But that's I know Reggie. He's a really bright, driven guy. He's a great marketer. He's very passionate about the project. So I like I like our partnership, and I think I've got a partner who's really committed to the project. So fingers crossed that we see the whole thing finished in comic form.
Absolutely. Yep. So, and I was going to ask, let's, in the vein of it finishing, after each book, do you then do a trade paperback or anything like that that collects all the issues together if that was a form that people wanted?
So we're working on that now. The goal is the first 4 issues of Isolation were somewhere between 115 maybe to 120 pages. So we're working on trying to get that first collected as a trade. The next issue, number 5, starts the second story arc in the book called Ghosts and Nightmares. So if we get 5 through 8 done, that would most likely be collected as a trade. And then 9 through 12 are Revelation. They would be a trade. So there would be 3 trades of roughly, between 100 and 140 pages per trade of book 1.
Got it. Very cool. Very cool. So I wanted to so we started off this podcast talking about your intro into comics, your kind of collecting, things like that. So talk to me now. So, JP and I, we have regular jobs, and we find the hobby as our escape to kind of get away from it all, the noise, everything you got going on out there, and kind of have some fun. We have this community of people. It's been great. Your job is comics. So do you also then get the escape of collecting, or are you I'm done with work today. I have a whole different hobby to get away from all this?
He's into trains.
So I have always worked 2 jobs my entire career.
Okay.
At different points, when I was doing the newspaper and magazine cartooning, I was able to focus the majority of my time there. But I always worked what I refer to as a parallel career. So I write and have books out, and I go to another job as well. So
Wow.
I do find, even though writing is a job, and doing a very deadline driven newspaper cartoon is a job too. I find it really enjoyable. I find it relaxing. I find that my mental health is strongest when I'm working on a creative project. It gets me excited. It keeps me going. I feel like I'm doing what I was meant to do. So it is still a creative release for me. Collecting comics absolutely is a hobby that I love. I enjoy. I'm a comics nerd. I've been one since I was a kid. I'll always be one. And I can't see myself ever not reading comics and being a fan of other creators' work and going to Comic Con. I still, I'm at Comic Cons doing signings, and then when my signings are done, I'm like in Artist Alley to go meet creators whose work that I love and buy their books and ask them to sign those books for me, because I don't think you could be a writer or an artist or anything in this industry without truly being a fan at heart.
Awesome. So real quick then, talk to us, what are you collecting today? Like what are you chasing down? What do you like to collect?
I had to stop myself. My biggest obsession in collecting is Neil Gaiman's Sandman series. And I got to the point where I had completed 3 or 4 full runs, and so I kind of cut myself off, but I still do look for there's some really low print run versions of Sandman, and a lot that aren't in Key Collector, people aren't aware of, like the Essential Vertigo reprints of the Sandman that came out in the late 90s. Those have a pretty low print run, and there are newsstand variants of those, and they're extremely hard to find. So I still look for those. I read a lot of indie comics. I'm trying to think. Most recently, I just finished the graphic novel Monster by Barry Windsor Smith. Was outstanding. The Good Asian.
Barry Windsor Smith wrote that. He wrote that Monster. He wrote that.
He wrote and illustrated it. Right. Excellent. Awesome. So there are certain creators I just recently got. I was a big Matt Wagner Mage fan growing up. I just recently started picking up some of his Grendel trades. So I'm out there hunting down hard to find Sandman comics, and I'm picking up and reading new series. Oh, I just blanked on the name. There's a new indie series that I really like. I've totally blanked on it.
No worries.
Sorry. I give him a shout out, but I blanked on it.
You can always message us, and I'm sure between all the IGs we can post it out there, because I'm not a big reader, but again, I don't trying to get more and more into those older John Byrne, more from Miracle Man, Frank Miller. So some of those to get myself into reading again, because I don't have as much time that I can devote to that, and that's my problem. But I think that's probably where the hobby could grow for me, because I'm so much into the art that if I got into the storytelling, I would be looking in different dollar bins for like what you're looking for, you know? So,
yeah,
it's the fun of collecting. Part of it is discovering amazing art, and part of it's like the treasure hunt aspect and the dollar bin digging and you know, searching for that issue you couldn't find anywhere. It's a blast.
oh yeah, we love it.
Yeah. Well, Doug, this was awesome. You really gave us a great inside look at the comic creating process. It was a ton of fun to just hear about it and hear your story. So thank you for coming on with us tonight.
Well, Rohan and JP, thank you so much for having me on your show. It was a pleasure meeting you and talking to you, and thanks for bearing with our early technical difficulties.
Yeah, no worries. Real quick, why don't you just tell people, you know, where to find you, how to look you up, you know, Instagram handles, all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. The best place to get me is on Instagram at Doug.Bratton, BRATTON.9, the number 9. And I'd encourage people to. Oh yeah, thanks. And I was just going to mention again, I'd encourage people, if you want to get a taste of isolation, you can go to swoldierpublishing.com. I think he has digital download copies that you could buy, or the hard copies, which to me are the best way to read comics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, this was excellent. I really loved just hearing about your process, the comic book process. All of it was a ton of fun. So appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
Yeah. JP, why don't you take us out?
Yeah, everyone, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Doug, thanks for being on. We will see everybody on the next episode. Peace out.
Peace out.